even if I'm doing, I don't know, a presentation, a panel, or even in the negotiations, when they give me the speaking notes, I'm like, I need to stick to this. So I just read it, because if not, I change everything. And yeah, I mean, I'd rather be spontaneous.
Yeah.
Monica,
Surprise.
Hola.
I kill you. The word.
Hola.
She was telling me, oh, but if you feel bad, tell Rene to cancel. It's okay. But she didn't mention anything. Oh,
Anything. And you guys had coffee yesterday. Surprise. I told you I would have a surprise guest that
Sí,
you would
yo estaba
love.
ayer estaba como que, ¿cómo
¿Estabas
hago? ¿Qué
lista?
pasa? ¿Le digo, no le digo? ¿Sorpresa o no es sorpresa?
No, sorpresa, mejor. ¿Y sabes qué, Eri? Vamos a hacer todo el show en español, ¿ok?
what?
Eri, Eri,
Por
What?
eso
Eri.
vine.
Oh,
Por
¿qué?
eso vine. Me dijeron que iba a ser, they told me it will be in Spanish. If not, I wouldn't be here.
No. We
No
can do a
bueno.
bit of
No,
Spanglish.
no muy bien.
No,
No,
bueno.
muy bien. But you can try.
She's the worst. I mean, how can you guys not telling me this?
No,
Okay.
it's the best. It's the best. Monica is so good. I was like, please don't tell her. Please don't tell her. Please don't tell her. Please don't tell her. And now here she is. I wanted that moment of you going, so good.
No, and yesterday she was like, oh, but if you feel that bad, like you should call it off. And I'm like, okay, no, I think I'll do it,
You please. I'm glad you both turned out. So it's good.
Yeah. Welcome to This Week in Carbon. I'm your host, Eddie Smith, and it's a pleasure to moderate today's discussion, where each week we bring together industry leaders and dive into the biggest stories in carbon markets and climate finance. And today we have with us Nathalie Flores, who's a renowned climate leader with over 15 years of experience in sustainable development policy, environmental governance, and climate change diplomacy. Super excited to have you on today. And then we have with us Monica De Oliveira, a carbon market veteran with years of experience across key players in the ecosystem. I'm very pleased to have you join us as well. And as usual, we have with us our weekly bestie, Rene Velasquez, carbon market veteran. Super excited to have everyone on the pod today. So with that being said,
especially with these two wonderful ladies.
Yeah, it's amazing. Can't wait. So I guess with that being said, let's get started with some breaking physical climate news. Just last week, it's official that January 2025 has been declared the warmest month on record, pushing us past further climate thresholds. And as per the Financial Times, two new scientific papers suggest that we may be breaching 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was set by the Paris Agreement far sooner than expected. And originally, the projections indicated we'd hit these thresholds around 2045. And some climate models now predict we could exceed this threshold as early as 2031 or 2034. And the data from 2024 suggests now that it could be even sooner. So I guess this raises the urgent question about the feasibility of keeping within the Paris Agreement's limits, right? And what actions governments, industries, and individuals need to take now and understand going forward. So with that being said, I'd love to start with some initial reactions on how this news lands for you personally, and ultimately get your thoughts on if 1.5 degrees Celsius is still a realistic target, or do you guys think it may be out of our reach? Would love to hear your thoughts. Who wants to start us off?
Nat, I'm gonna go Nat.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, I guess I start. I think first what we need to do is to put ourselves in perspective of the world we're living and the broader outlook beyond the targets defined by the countries under the UN climate change. Because the countries to the UN are the people that we vote for and the people that we, entitle as a taxpayer to actually defend our best interest. And that includes how we are going to go through our economic transformation to actually reach these goals. And And I want to use this conversation to also put yourselves in perspective on how these targets are defined. You know, we have the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change that is basically the scientists that the governments appoint to actually review what we need in terms of nature to actually be able to catalyze decision that can get us over there. So first is that framework, you know, created internationally with the scientists and the decisions at political level and how to actually reach that. But the other side is it's the common citizen, right? And how the common citizen perceives this and how this is communicated. I was talking with Rene the other day about how the climate crisis, it's very linked to a storytelling crisis. You know, we speak the climate language, but the common citizen doesn't. And with that, I go to my father. I mean, my father is an agricultural engineer in the Dominican Republic in a very small town. He wakes up every day at the same time. He goes and to his land to you know, to produce what the common Dominican eats every day. And he can tell me one day, oh, I'm so happy that it's raining because it's been weeks that it's not raining, or totally the opposite. So when we go to the, you know, to the common citizen, what the common citizen understand of these goals, or what the common citizen understand of having the hottest month on record. I'm super surprised that Monica is here. It was my birthday 2 weeks ago, and we happened to be very, very good friends. We became friends working in this field, and I'm very happy to have her, you know, as a close friend of mine. And we went to ski. Well, we weren't
We
to try
try.
try to ski, right? Because we are from the Caribbean, and I mean, we had to learn. And then when I put myself in perspective in a very personal way, it's like we almost don't have snow, you know? We have to be monitoring the cameras of the mountains for about 3 weeks to actually be able to decide if we were going to plan this weekend getaway with our friends, to practice and to fall down and to get better. But the fact that we need to protect that ecosystem puts one in perspective with these goals of keeping the temperature in reach. And another thing is how, you know, the whole northern hemisphere, it's planning this stuff, and when they go up to the mountains, it's like, wow, but we almost don't have snow. So, you know, I'm trying to put yourself in perspective to kick off the conversation on how the common citizen understand these things and how it's affected by these things. And then you have media telling you that New York is frozen, that the river is frozen. Then you have politicians using that to say that the whole concept of global warming, because you guys know that climate change is a topic that came from lobbyism. So actually we are getting warmer, and that's a fact. So to my point, you have the storytelling behind these things confusing people, because if you have a politician telling you that New York is frozen and then the global warming doesn't exist, the common citizen, the person that is not in our environment, can think totally the opposite. So I don't know. I will open the floor also to you guys to see what you think with this limits,
Mm.
but from the perspective of the common citizen, that is the one that we, like the five of us, want to help, right?
Yeah, yeah, thanks for that. And I think just adding to that, because me, Renee and I had the pleasure of going to Kenya on a project site visit earlier in the fall, and we went to these farmers' land, and they would say, you know, we can't predict the weather anymore. You know, 20 years ago, we could predict when the rain would fall, when you know, we could tell by the changing, you know, climate that the rain would be coming in 2 or 3 days. But now it's much different. There's much longer periods of drought, and we do not know. The weather is unpredictable. We can't predict the rain. And these are smallholder farmers in Kenya who don't speak any English. And we were working with our project partner on communicating the impacts of climate change, teaching them about climate change in their own language, because there's that language barrier, like you mentioned. So I just thought I'd bring that up. I don't know, Renee, if you want to touch on that, because I thought that had to do with the story about your father.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Look, I think there's some really interesting points, and I want to hear Monica's take on it, and I also want to hear about the ski trip. But look, let me give you my perspective. It's kind of pretty simple. There's some things that Nathalie said which I think really resonate insofar as, and we talked about this the other day, right, Nat, with regards to it being a communications crisis as much as it is a scientific crisis. I'll start with the latter and then kind of go to the former. The reality is, what this story tells us, and what the media has been telling us for some time, and what scientists have been telling the media to tell us, right, is that the science of this 1.5 degree threshold is no longer theoretical. I think 2023 was the hottest year on record, and 24 is shaping to have been pretty close, if not hotter. And so now we see this exceeding temperature above the pre-industrial levels for months on end, and we're continuously setting these records. And so the gig's up. Like we're actually exceeding our carbon budget much more quickly, and that's what's relating to this increase in temperatures. The communication piece is, I think, a failure because most of the media looks at it from a sensationalist perspective, and sensationalism sells initially, right? And it's kind of like, if it bleeds, it leads. But it doesn't resonate with individual people because it's not material necessarily to their daily lives. And because of the nature of climate versus weather, it loses kind of relevance with regards to certain things that are relevant on the day's agenda. Right. And so you look at macro politics, you look at macroeconomics, and then geopolitics and other local issues. And climate seems to kind of go down until then you have a massive climatic linked event. So we've had one already this year with the fires in LA, and we've seen the total devastation that's caused. And the causality is really difficult to attribute. And so I think that's one of the key things. But back to the communication side of it, I think where it breaks down is that people feel helpless in dealing with something that is so big, it's planetary, and they struggle to think how they can affect a change. And the answer, unfortunately, is policy, right? And this is where we all come in, because we're protagonists in this story, working to price carbon at a voluntary level and on a compliance and sort of policy level. And it takes time to build consensus. And that's where I think, because we're doing the work, we lose that momentum around when it becomes topical. And then when it gets pushed down, it goes down the priority order. So this is just one of the kind of the features and it's a bug effectively in the broader system. But there's a clear need, I think, with this story in order to have back on the agenda near the top the importance for climate policy and market-based mechanisms to help to regulate that. Monica, I want to get your take on that. And then again, I want to hear this story about the skiing.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's really important that you bring into the conversation the common citizens. I mean, the common people, how they see this, how they understand it. Sometimes I don't know how to explain my family what I'm doing, and that's a mistake. We need to be able to teach them, because at the end, information is power. And if they understand what they think is happening and what it's not like a regional issue. This happened in LA and also in Haiti. It's like this affect everybody.
Yeah.
So I think we need to find first solution to help both, poor developing countries and also wealthy regions, and stay strong in this situation and try bring those people to the conversation. I'm not talking about to the United Nations, but maybe in our table, and explaining then what is happening, why is this happening? Because at the end, we are in part of the cycle. For example, I thank you, Eddie, for calling me veteran, but I don't think I'm a carbon veteran. But I'm in the end of the I'm basically at the end of the process. There's a lot of things happening before that. So there are scientific people working on it, governments, ONGs. There's a lot of things happening there, and we are not able even to explain our families, our friends, what we are doing. So that's why it's important in this kind of conversation, go to the basic and try to go to the basic things, to the deeper scenes, and get people understand what is happening, what is important for them to be involved in these kind of conversations.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Monica. Thank you for that. And I'm not going to let you off the hook. I want to hear the story. But it is true. Look, and that's kind of the impetus for this podcast, right? Like we're going to cover the stories that are of the week, right? And we're going to talk about this inside carbon kind of speak, but ultimately it's to make it more democratized, right? That's really a theme that I think people will hear over the next few years from me. And it's a realization that we work in silos. We just do, right? Because we gravitate towards specialization. That's just the modus operandi for career development. And then we live in these echo chambers, right? With people that are all of the same tribe effectively. And that's great. But to Nat's earlier point, I think it is a breakdown in communication. We, the carbon market folks, have not done a great job of communicating it to a broad sector of broad sectors and the broad sort of populace, I should say. Right. And I think that we do need to democratize it. We need to provide people with tools that they can then utilize. And so, Eddie touched on the communities. We're very fortunate to go and visit the communities in Kenya late last year with to visit a project that one of our partners is developing. And we got to see the impact. And now they understand that they're protagonists and they're beneficiaries of the potential for carbon finance. Right. And then we have an obligation as practitioners in this market in order to then be able to drive that finance and to be able to scale it. How? Through doing what we do on a daily basis, which is the consultation and then engaging with the corporate buyers predominantly and institutional investors as well that are looking to take positions on carbon for whatever reasons. It could be to obviously for offsetting requirements on the corporates and for investors looking at it as an investment and with a return on investment. And what we've done is we've created an asset class, and it's nascent, and it's burgeoning, I should say. It's nascent a few decades ago, but it's kind of still growing. I think it's maybe more aptly kind of adolescent, and it still requires a lot more of this kind of fostering and development. But I think what we lack is that broader participation. We need more inclusivity around thought and perspective and geography, and that is happening. That's the good news. When you look at it from a political perspective, Article 6 is now at implementation. And Nat, I really want to dive in and get your perspectives around what's happening there, because for such a long time, that discussion or those negotiations took really a decade to kind of come to fruition. And now we're starting to see money starting to flow in, and we're starting to see the effects of those pricing policies that come from the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, right? And we see a dissemination of pricing systems. And now we have quarter of the world's GDP essentially covered under a carbon price, and that increasing over time. So that's a really good news story. And then this type of platform is in order to enable folks that are specialists to come together and then talk about it to include more people effectively.
And with that, Rene, I want to add something. Like everything
Please.
you explained, we understand, right? But I think when we fragmentate, like private sector, public policy, society, we are not seeing each other as a whole, because it's like, okay, I have the corporate goals, I have the public sector goals, etc. And then society, which is the ultimate goal, because we are supposed to try to get people, the most vulnerable, but also the people driving the economy to work together, because unless the people driving the economy make the same profit they do for other business, they won't invest in the concept of sustainability, that is people, planet, right? So to my point,
because we haven't made it accessible now, right?
Exactly.
Today.
That's exactly the point. So when we talk to each other, when we organize ourselves to go to conferences, to actually be able to put a project out there and then finance that project, and then have the commodity with enough liquidity to actually stay in the market and make it attractive to a specific stakeholder, we are forgetting or not understanding the whole thing. So you have the people, as I say before, that you put in place to actually make these decisions global. And then we go to a COP and we don't even follow a negotiation and what is going to rule what it's going to regulate us, if that makes sense, you know? So I think the first thing is for us to understand the broader picture of the people that we put in charge to actually democratize the tools that we are trying to make work, you know? And by that, I remember when you explained to me beautifully how to see the market as a net that connect to each other, right? And how to make it work for everyone. So I think the first thing we have to do is to translate all these decisions that policymakers put out there for us to be regulated, right? And that's what I think the delay comes from, because at the end everybody wants to deep into the regulation in their favor, beyond on what the ultimate goal is, which is, you know, reduce carbon emissions. And this is not the first time I say it, probably won't be the last. I always write this phrase because I'm going to be repeating this all the time, and it's that we cannot forget the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is reduce carbon emissions, right? Greenhouse gas emissions. That's our ultimate goal, no matter the tool that we use. And the convention and the countries to the convention and the stakeholders to the convention, and by the convention, I don't mean the secretariat, I mean the whole concept, right? And by stakeholders, I mean everybody that engaged in terms of the decisions that are taken under the UN climate change needs to understand that our ultimate goal is reduce contamination from the gases that, you know, create global warming and climate change as we know it for the past years. And
Well, for generations, it's since the Industrial Revolution, but we're only realizing it recently. I agree with you. The thing I'd say is, yes, that is the mission that we in this sector have, you know, attached ourselves to and believe in, but not everyone does. And so because humanity is diverse and we have different viewpoints, we also have different vested interests. And it comes down to the incentives. And I think you nailed it, which you said when you said it comes down to that the finance isn't equitably distributed. It's not flowing in the right directions, right? And we've seen a start, and we've seen stops and starts in carbon markets over the past few decades. And you know, it is a true sort of, you know, boom and bust type of commodity cycle that we've seen. And I kind of, this is the third time for me. And but I do believe that the foundations are strong and that there is potential for scaling here because of the diffusion and ultimately I guess the intersection of voluntary and compliance markets that we're living in right now. But ultimately, this pricing of this externality, those benefits need to flow and be equitably distributed, right? There needs to be beneficiaries of investing in this asset class, right? We need to attract capital allocators that are risk averse, and we also need to include individuals in this space. You look at it for equities, and you know, retail participation now moves markets. We've seen this through the meme stocks, right, over the last few years in particular. But this market fails to make that inclusion. We have been in, and we'll come out of stealth for a little venture that we've been working on to try to address that kind of imbalance, because we think that it'll be accretive from a liquidity perspective. That the markets have today excluded participation from broader investors than the small subset that we currently have now, which is enterprise and institutional investors. And we think that the broader community, individuals, family offices, high net worths, but also, you know, SMEs and everybody else in between should participate in this market. We see billions and trillions of dollars being invested into crypto assets, and no criticism to crypto assets, but ultimately they don't drive benefits to local communities. They don't reduce greenhouse gases or remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So what we have is, again, this communication breakdown. And I think that what we need as the collective we is to engage on this broader mission of expansion, right, and inclusivity.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
Eddie,
well
I think
said.
we morphed away from the question. But...
Yeah, to segue back.
No, I want to add something to that, and
Yeah, go for it.
And it's the whole thing of climate finance as we know it. And
Mm,
and I think when we put in perspective the 10 years of deciding having a global carbon market into place, and then you have the agreements country to country, and just yesterday I was analyzing the top Latin American countries actually using infrastructure from the voluntary carbon market to this global compliance market. And then I see all coming together finally, and that's why I decided to be hopeful, because when the new with the decision of the new quantified goal on climate finance that came from
mm,
COP29, and the push from the goals of 2030 to 2035 to deploy capital finance from taxpayer money, that because that's what the governments can compromise, right? And then you have the carbon market into place, trying to work together from voluntary infrastructure to compliance infrastructure, and actually the countries adopting these standards in general. We have in
mm,
Chile the adoption of Ser Carbono, gold standard, BERRA, and then you have Peru adopting methodologies from gold standard and BERRA as well. You have Panama with memorandum of understanding with BERRA, gold standard, and CAR. So if you look into that, it means that the whole work of the past 10 years, it's finally paying forward, but also you see that with that delay at global scale of funding to actually
mm,
reform multilateral banks, lowering cost of capital, increase financing, and inequality in climate finance with a clear definition, for example, for the Green Climate Fund, for the Finance Committee of the UN Climate Change, and the big, climate debate. I personally see that this is going to be the moment to actually transform that, because countries can afford to have a transformation on the way like financial institutions are tagging our assets, from now to 2035. And that's where I see the opportunity for the market.
mm.
So I'll leave it there.
Yeah. No, very well said. And I think on the topic of delayed country level climate action, hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but this past week brought another major setback regarding nationally determined contributions. Not sure if you guys have seen, but more than 170 countries, including 7 of the world's 10 largest economies, failed to submit updated nationally determined contributions to the UN by this past Monday's deadline. So despite this urgency around global climate action, only one major economy, which was the United Kingdom, submitted an updated strategy that aligns with the Paris Agreement on time. And this certainly adds growing concerns that the world is backsliding on climate commitments. And now, we're seeing major economies in North and South America, in Asian Pacific, and Oceania, that are either stepping back from their commitments or openly withdrawing. And it seems that a lot of other advanced economies are certainly starting to question the climate policies and commitments that their governments put in place years ago, as fears of, slower economic growth and stagflation begin to creep up on them, certainly in the European Union. So I guess that's a great way to segue into the next few questions, which is, why do you think so many countries are failing to meet this deadline around their global climate action? And are we witnessing the collapse of the Paris Agreement in real time? And if so, what comes next?
If I can do just a small comment on that, in my perspective, I think most developing countries are facing economic pressures. There's a lot of things happening now that they prefer to focus on short term than long term. So at the end, Paris Agreement, it's voluntary. They have no any how can I say it? They have a commitment, but if they fail, they don't have any punishment. It's
Mhm.
like they
No
can
penalties.
exactly no penalty for them, and I think that's where is the mistake. But will they agree on have this kind of commitment? But if you don't go to the deadline, you will be you will have a penalty. So that's something that I would like, for example, Nathalie, that she's involved in she was involved on those kind of things. Do you think that there will be a moment where countries not only commit voluntary, but also have penalties or deadlines to commit what they said?
Yeah, and I think we go back to the communication, to the communication crisis, because even though not all the countries presented their NDC in timely manner, this is probably not an issue of not presenting the NDC. I know developing countries working in their NDC. It's the whole system, and unfortunately how governments work, if we go back to the timing, because developing countries like need to put a lot of money into place to actually have this policy together, or the countries that want to do it well, or the countries that want to honor the commitment in a certain way that everybody is included. For example, when I was climate change director for the government of my country, and we were putting together our first NDC, we spent around 6 months doing workshops with the private sector, with academia, and with the government, of course, the government institutions. So all stakeholders, society, group of certain businesses. Let's say the people from coffee or cacao, to sit them on the table, to understand what this policy meant, to understand the institutional arrangements that our countries had, and have them agree that they can actually reduce in their operations 27% of a small developing island state to actually achieve development. And sorry to be redundant. So you have the president of the Dominican Republic, right? 3 months before we presented our NDC to the convention, telling the world that the Dominican Republic was going to be net zero, is going to be net zero too, because they have this target by 2050. We are talking about one of the poorest countries of the world, but actually the economy that grows faster in Latin America, right? And it's a country that shares the land with the poorest country of the world, which is Haiti, and with a lot of issues. So heated by hurricanes by 6 months. So every 6 months, the Dominican Republic is receiving hurricanes maybe monthly. That's why when people say, oh, there's a hurricane coming to the US, I'm like, yeah, it's already destroyed the Dominican Republic. So to my point, the countries that want to do this well in terms of the commitment to the Paris Agreement, that everybody, the difference with the Paris Agreement and the convention is that the commitment to the convention, it's from common but differentiated circumstances, right? So you have the non-Annex 1 countries and the Annex 1 countries that need to compromise differently in technology transfer, education, climate finance, and the pillars to the convention. But in terms of the Paris Agreement, we all need the same level of commitment. So what I want to say with this is that maybe countries didn't fail to present an ambitious and second NDC or updated NDC. It's because they are working towards a system that puts them in a situation very complicated. For you to receive $1 million just to make a policy paper that it's called a national determined contribution, you have to go through a lot, right? A lot of scrutiny, because this is taxpayer money to actually put into place a policy. So that's that. And on the other side of failing to deliver NDCs or not, we and the voluntary side of the agreement and the punishment for not having that into place is actually communication. Now we're saying that only the United Kingdom, as the major economy, presented an ambitious NDC. But if we go back to 3 weeks, 4 weeks before the inauguration of the US presented a very ambitious second NDC. And now, within a year, that policy won't be taken into account because of not being part of the Paris Agreement. So to my point, it's the punishment of being ambitious or not, if that makes sense, that comes out of this. And it's a very comfortable situation for countries in terms of not having a legally binding agreement in terms of punishment for not achieving certain goals. But we have to understand that what the convention creates and the foundation platform from the convention is by governments, for the governments, into governments. And that's where, when I'm analyzing personally now in my new role, that of course doesn't entitle the government itself to define when something it's good, is the policies within the countries that comes from the global framework. So if you have competitive incentives like the renewable energy law in my country, in which the owner of a renewable energy of a project is the owner of the carbon credits, that's an incentive that the government of the Dominican Republic is giving to you, So that's where the policy, like the plus of the policy, come from. And then the punishment, I see it basically in both not having the investment, for not having the policies into place, or the incentives that you should create within your framework from the global framework. And of course, what is a robust scheme for you to invest in certain country? Because at the end, what we want to do is to develop, but in a low carbon perspective. And I'll close with a question. How do you
I like
see
this.
how do you see all of you, how do you see the fact that right now we are fighting the consequences of industrialization, right? But we are industrialized already in terms of the people that drive economy, because also we have to demystify the fact of who is moving the world. There are agendas. You just mentioned crypto. Then we have artificial intelligence. I've been to the World Economic Forum for the past 3 years, and the only thing we talk about is artificial intelligence. So you have to see what the people driving the economy are driving the economy to, right? And if we don't look into that, if we don't name things by the name, and we won't be able to tackle it. So we are already developed. We in the global north, hence that, right? We have the emerging economies: China, India, South Africa, Russia, and I'm missing one because they are 5. But to my
Brazil.
point, Brazil, yeah. Oh, Brazil. I'm going to Brazil next week to talk about climate change adaptation. So back to the point, like my question, if we are already developed and you see like countries fully industrialized, investing in actually be more sustainable, and I can talk for myself because I'm in Madrid, Monica, you too. Like if I don't separate my waste, there's no way that my waste is taken out of my house, because I have to separate it, right? So like, if we are already industrialized, why are we still in the model of acting like if we were too industrialized, if that makes sense, like we are still in the model, like if we go back, I don't know how many years from industrialization, but we are still acting like if we have to industrialize. That could come from everything we have in our phone digitalized, which we all love and we couldn't live without that, or I don't know, other ways to actually emit, like automatization of processes, of digital processes, just to put a name out of there. But to my point is, if we are not in the way to actually make industrial investment at global scale, why are we still with that same model? And I think that's the question I put out there, because that's where I see climate finance in terms of the carbon market as a big solution. Because if you give them, if you invite them, I mean the people that are emitting like every day, to actually make their business successful, for that they need to emit, you need to give them the tool to actually abate that. So my question is, why are we still emitting, and how you guys see that from everything I just say. And if you let me talk, I won't shut up. So stop me.
It was a good counterbalance because the criticism for episode 1 was that I took over most of the time. But full disclosure, I only got 3 hours of sleep last week before the episode. I might take a stab at this one, Nat. It's a really interesting question, obviously a complicated question, and I think that warrants a complicated answer, but I'll try to keep it brief. I think the short answer is that industrialization is inextricably linked to development. And I think that there's a drive from both private and public sectors towards development because it actually raises GDP and ultimately has a beneficial effect with regards to the population. We've seen that in action, certainly over the last 100 years. We've all been beneficiaries of that. I think most consciously, we've seen that certainly in developing economies, and in particular in China over the last 35, 40 years. So that's the answer. Why are we still growing at this voracious kind of pace? And it has to do with economics. And ultimately, GDP is the key driver here, right? And so economic output and productivity of the population is how we calculate that GDP. But I do think you hit the nail right on the head. There's an inherent opportunity as economies grow and contract, but certainly in the growth phase, to look at growth in a more sustainable manner. And I think that that's certainly taken hold in boardrooms and in terms of, like you said, the invisible them who are shaping global economies and kind of the direction by pure imperatives of efficiency to do more with less, right? And to get more with less effectively. And the corollary there is the decarbonization agenda, right? We're trying to, at the same time as we're trying to balance growth and try to reduce emissions, but there's an inherent opportunity there for a different type of growth, one where we have cleaner sources of energy, and that's the broad energy transition argument. And I think that it is really complicated to understand, and it's a really complicated sort of space to dive on and do it justice in a few minutes. But that's kind of the answer there. Does that resonate with you?
Monica?
Yeah,
I want to get Monica's thoughts on this.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think it's all the thing that you put on the table. It's true. We need to keep this conversation going until the time we all are in the same positions. It's like, because I'm sometimes I'm so focused on project development, on trying to bring corporates to the market, but it's beyond that. It's beyond that. If we are sometimes confused about these questions, how a corporate that doesn't understand how the market works, how the entire process works, will go to buy some credits. So it's a lot of confusion in the market. There are people that believe, okay, removal, avoidance. There are people that see no carbon markets. We need to reduce emission. We need to cut emission, but we cannot compensate with credit. So it's beyond that. And if we are confused sometimes, and sometimes I'm watching your podcast or but in LinkedIn, I read what the people is writing. Sometimes I don't understand. And I see a lot of different way to see, and we have the same goal, as Nathalie said before. So my point is, if we are sometimes confused and we are the experts and we already know how we can go to a corporate that they have so many things happening, risk reputation, the standard are changing or updating methodologies, how they can trust in this market if there's a lot of things happening right now, how we can work together with Paris Agreement, that it's the main agreement right now, but also how voluntary carbon market can help governments and corporates to feel secure about the decision they are taking right now. And that's something that it's been in my, and I talk about Nathalie about this with Nathalie a lot, and we started, and of course she came from the government. She has really good point of view, but also I say, but I don't see it that way, because we have a same goal, but sometimes we are so focused on what we are doing right now that we are not empathize what the other it's looking for, it's working on. So I think that's a reflection that I think we need to also, maybe not for this podcast, but maybe in the following, see how we can, voluntary carbon market can help with the infrastructure we already have, to governments and to corporate to trust in what we are doing.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that also comes, I mean, I have to add something just for the matter of clarity. Like when a country defined emissions reductions target, a country cannot reduce the emissions reductions target. The operation in the country, it's the one that it's going to help the country report the emissions reduction target, you know? And that's why I go back to the national determined contribution process that we did by 2020, when we presented our first national determined contribution. For example, the Association of Cement of the Dominican Republic has, per law, in our country, the compromise to report to the central bank of the Dominican Republic their contamination, their emissions, right? No matter if it's a GHG or any other gas. And then if they have that commitment, that means that they need to train themselves in the way in which they report, I don't know, their emissions in general, right? So when we were putting together the NDC, we sit down on the table, the cement industry of the Dominican Republic, and guess what? Our inventory, our carbon emissions reductions inventory, has the data from the Cement Association of the Dominican Republic, with a whole chapter for them, because they've been so good in relying with the IPCC guidelines and our targets to monitor our emissions from that sector, because our law, you know, demands them to do that. That now they are tier 2 in reporting, so they're really good in terms of how they report. So to my point, what countries are compromising is how they are going to give you incentives for you to actually achieve cleaner operations. Because a country itself, even if you account what the emissions of the operations of governmental offices, unless your government is owner of the petrol company of the country, your government probably don't have, emissions itself. So these targets are to make the operations cleaner. And I think that's where we lose track in between voluntary, private, and the actual government, because I don't see it separate. I see that something that the private sector reduce, it's something that I'm reporting my country is reducing, if that makes sense, you know? And that's
Makes
why,
total sense.
yeah, and if you see the whole market, like for example, if you tell me that I don't know, your project in Kenya is reducing, I don't know how many carbon from whatever stock you're trying to put together over there, right? Or any other country. But
We'll
just
have information about the project, but it's an ARR
yeah,
project, and it's hundreds of millions of tons over 25 years.
exactly. So to my point, that government is to report that they have that stock over there, you know, and I don't see anything separate. So what my ideal world will be, it's that whatever is reported in the voluntary, it's connected to what that country is reporting, and that's where we need to fill the gap right now. And I have to go back to the governments that are using voluntary carbon market infrastructure, or even
can we double click on that one, Nat? So can I just kind of
sure.
tee it up? But I'm really curious as to what you said, and I do agree, and I think that this is really good, taking on also what Monica said earlier. There's a tendency of like, okay, there's this fragmentation, public sector, private sector, different industries, individuals, like families. It's just, it's too difficult when it's looked at, you know, as this broad kind of swath. But it is one integrated ecosystem. And as it relates to the Paris Agreement and to carbon markets, this public and private partnership, effectively, this interoperability is really key. Right. And so I want to double click on this point that you mentioned earlier, and specifically, let's take it to the Latin American context, because you guys are both experts within that world. Let's take it to Chile. Let's take it to Colombia. Let's take it to Peru, and have a look at the, I guess, inclusion and reliance on what are traditionally purely voluntary standards, but now for meeting compliance obligations, right? Do you want to unpack that for me? And that's a question to both Monica and Nathalie. Maybe I'll go to Monica first. Do you want to take that one, Monica? Because I think Nat and I will just take everybody.
No, Nathalie, go first. Go first.
Okay. Go, Nat. You're on mute.
Me, I mean,
yes.
I don't shut up.
You might not get it back.
Getting me monologue. I know. I mean, people will
no
be
monologue.
Like,
you're under 2 minutes. Go.
Okay.
I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. If you see the whole picture, right now I'm more worried about the demand side of these credits rather than if the developing country is taking the lead or not. The developing country, it's getting ready. Sorry?
Expand on that. You're concerned about the demand?
Yes.
Okay. But depends.
About that of actually, what the countries are putting together to be ready for them and tell them, okay, I'm going there because you have the infrastructure ready and because I want to help reduce carbon emissions. You know what I mean? So I want to make my operations cleaner, and that's why I come to you. So basically, I think everything can work, but then where is the demand for that infrastructure that it's being put together? Like, where is it?
Yeah, but it's kind of like,
depends.
Yeah, why don't you answer this one, Monica? No, you jump in.
No, it's if we go directly to, if we see each country by themselves, it's different because, for example, we have compliance, carbon tax in Colombia and Chile. And if you go to Colombia, there's oversupply. And if you go to Chile, it's a lot of demand and not supply. So I think, for example, in Chile, the demand is for 30 million carbon credits per year. And the offer last year was only 8 million, 10 million. Or that's why, okay, they accept to add other standards. But the thing, I'm worried about the demand in voluntary. That's where I'm worried. When we go into compliance,
everyone's worried about that right now.
in Latin America, Chile has a problem on the supply side. Colombia, it's over supply. Mexico, it's working. I mean, Querétaro is already accepting credits, but maybe other states will do it as well. Brazil is working in the ETS. So I'm really happy that Latin America is taking the lead. Maybe it's not perfect, but it's taking the lead on creating compliance markets within the country. And maybe we don't know, maybe in the future it is a regional compliance with Mercosur, or that could happen as well. If the Paris, that's an idea, that's something that I was thinking about yesterday. Maybe if the Paris Agreement doesn't move as we want, maybe the regions can take like the European nation with the ETS. So maybe in Latin America, we are leading the carbon tax, ETS. Maybe we can create like regional agreements between countries. So that's where you put a situation where compliance is part of the solutions on the demand side.
I think that's the right approach. Sorry, Nat. So I agree with you, Monica. I think that's the key. The demand side, when you start to get these compliance systems, it's in that word. It's in compliance, right? So now the rule sets, and policymakers do their very best. I know how hard it is to actually get legislation through, and then ultimately create a dictum to say, okay, these are the rules, go. Markets evolve, and there's this kind of fallacy that markets are incredibly efficient, but they not always. That might be the end state, but there is volatility in therein, right? And so you highlighted this, Monica. The Colombian market was thriving in 2019, 20, and 21 because they had this signal for compliance that set a baseline effectively in terms of what the price would be, minimum price would be for a project developer to go ahead and develop a project in Colombia. And obviously the peculiarity of that market is that they shifted from allowing international units to purely domestic credits. And it created a signal for investors to go in and start developing projects and then having at least a backstop or a floor, let's call it, I think more accurately, with regards to the price. It just so happened that there was this perfect confluence. In 2019, the international market was lower than the price set in the Colombian tax. And then by 21, the price of international markets was almost triple that price. So what happened? Huge investments ran into both Brazil and Colombia and Peru and other countries that had the nature-based solutions to go ahead and scale. And then they had willing buyers in the global context. What's happened since is that, and as you said, on the voluntary side, demand has diminished because of integrity concerns that are well documented and that we've discussed in various different fora. And then what's left is that, yes, there's more supply that's now eligible in Colombia that would meet the natural compliance equilibrium. And that's just again, the pendulum swinging from side to side. I do think that over time, having a purely domestic focus and domestic generation approach doesn't work for the same reason that global markets exist, that humans have been trading for millennia, that you could have the possibility to generate a surplus in your country, right? Or you may not be able to, and that's where international trade starts to be optimized. So one country can be a net exporter of X, and another one can be a net buyer of it, and vice versa. They can trade with multiple counterparties. I think that that's the evolution. And I think, and the good news is, and that I will hand it to you then, is that we have a universal currency within that context, which is the carbon credit. It's 1 ton of CO2, and in this case, it's an ITMO under Paris. And so I do think that over time, policy will start to shift towards this kind of universal rule set, whether ITMO or with the governance frameworks that are currently voluntary, that kind of morph into certification bodies. Your take on that, Nat?
Yeah. I was gonna say that the geek in me, because I'm a lawyer that transitioned to science, right? Yes, I hold a Master of Science, and I was almost not admitted at uni in UK because I was not an engineer. And they were like, okay, but you cannot do a master's with us because of that. But then I got it. And now I'm Humanitarian of the Year from that alumni association. So
well, there you go.
my point of the geek in me, it's like yesterday. Funny.
Can I just say,
Monica,
I love the way you pronounce certain words.
yeah.
I want to go back to Vera. I just like,
I mean,
I'm gonna call Mandy and say, you need to really double click on this one, right? Ser carbono, obviously that rolls off the tongue, but Vera,
Okay.
it's amazing. Amazing.
So
Mercosur.
Mercosur, I love that one as well, Monica.
Yeah. There's something interesting in this, and I was geeking out of that with Monica yesterday. Then with Tommy from B0, I called Tommy. I was like, I was, thinking on this, and Ben from Silvera, because Monica and I were discussing about all the science behind this. And then we go back to the whole infrastructure that the carbon market, like the voluntary carbon market, has put into place to actually be able to scale up, right? And then we go to the whole infrastructure of science-based approach that the voluntary carbon market has put into place to actually deliver and face a scrutiny and the things that we have saw in the voluntary carbon market on the years. But then I'm like, the countries have a need for support in terms of the science behind not only a carbon credit, any tagging. If I adopted a green taxonomy for the banks of the Dominican Republic or a bond, I need the science behind that. I even need the science in my Ministry of Finance to actually be able to take the 2% of the tax that every Dominican pays every time they put gas or oil in their car, and that goes to an account that doesn't go directly to the Ministry of Environment to actually go to our protected areas. So to my point is that there's so much infrastructure in the voluntary carbon market to actually protect that credit that you are issuing, and countries need that. Countries need the same approach in their framework to actually make it work. And the private sector has it over there to actually make it work, if that makes sense, So what I want, what I idealize is a world in that whole trading scheme that we know it's going to work if we put the effort, that goes beyond that little transaction. Because the problem, Monica, over here is that we want to see result only in the transaction. So we want to make our business work and we want to make the money out of the transaction. But the broader look is that the whole infrastructure is like, countries need that right now.
Mm.
And going back to the science perspective, I just put myself in the situation in which I have a department of emissions reductions, right? And that department needs to put together a national communication, needs to put together a biannual transparency report, needs to put together an NDC tracking to actually track upon the legal framework of the country if the NDC works and how every target is met, right? And for example, for forestry, a national forest reference level or a national reference emission level. And countries need to do all of that report. And the voluntary carbon markets, it's going to the field with drones, with satellite images, just to make a transaction work. And that science behind is what the country needs, if that makes sense, right? So
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think jumping in here, do we think that Article 6.2, 6.4, and just will play a role in filling that gap at the country level, right? From the compliance and voluntary market perspective, right? Filling that gap. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Natalie.
Yeah.
What about Monica? Natalie and I talk too much.
Yeah, right? Yeah, we don't shut up. Dale, Monica.
Yeah, all of your thoughts.
Yeah, I think in general, Article 6.2.4 and 0.8 could help a lot to bridge that gap that it's right now, that it's a concerning for all of us. What I'm worried about is the timeline. It's like, I mean, how many I entered to this market in 2019, and I already was hearing about Article 6, and was last year that we look, okay, 6.4, maybe it's on the track to move forward. And it had been like 2 months, and and I really think that Article 6, it's part of the solution, but I'm worried about the time. Maybe in Brazil, there's something that could happen. And between that happen, we cannot keep waiting. Everybody's like, okay, 6.2, 6.4, but we cannot keep waiting for that happening. We need to make solutions faster, because climate risk crisis is not waiting for us to sign all agree on Article 6.2 or 6.4. There's so many interests, and I understand it's not easy to agree with another country. Each country have its own necessities, needs, and problems, issues. So I think will help, but we don't have time to wait until they decide how to do it or not. I don't know when 6.4 will be operational. It's maybe end of the year, maybe early next year, when we will have the first issue credits by 28, 29. So, it takes time, because, okay, you transition the actual project, because so many people don't understand that 6.4 is the continuation of CDM. So the same project that are eligible is still under CDM 2021 plus move to 6.4. And you will have the same project in China, Brazil, India, renewable projects that are on the spotlight, landfill. And then, of course, you can put new projects, but those projects where people have put a lot of money, a lot of, not only money, a lot of effort, are waiting for something, waiting for a decision. And previous owner are looking other ways to do it. Okay, let's move it to another standard, but maybe it's not possible. So there's a lot of people that already made a lot of commitment, and maybe in CDM, no, but also in other standard with conservation project. project developers commit to the communities, and the community have been waiting 3, 4, 5, even more years waiting for the solutions, and they're still waiting
For outcomes.
so
I think that that's the problem because of this lack of clarity. My hope, and I think it aligns with what you just said, Monica, which is, man, it's taken so long to get things to a position of kind of just building momentum, right? We've had no inertia really in this market for quite some time, but it's a symptom of the multilateral engagement process. And Nathalie, you can speak about that at nauseam, I would imagine. But it is what it is. It's what we have. There's no other better solution, right? We need that inclusion, and we need to hear those voices, and we need to find a consensus. I think that now the good news is that consensus has been found, it is being implemented, and there are these various different pathways. Article 6.2, for folks that don't know, but it's this bilateral mechanism where countries essentially create bridges between them, and then Article 6.4 is essentially this centralized control. And like you said, it's a continuous evolution of the Kyoto Protocol and the Clean Development Mechanism. And ultimately, what we need then is those systems to leverage all of the lessons that the voluntary market has provided and has learnt itself over the course of the past 2 decades, and to continuously improve and move forward. Why? Because integrity matters, quality matters, and we need the participation from the private sector. And all of these things are a confluence, right? They all interoperable, and we need them to kind of move forward. Why? Because we need financial flows on a project by project level, and then national levels to materialize. Like Nat said, governments have only one pot of money, and that comes from tax revenue. And I think that there's a sense, certainly as more populist governments start to take hold, that hey, aid and tax revenues going to aid, as we've seen with the USAID kind of situation in the last few weeks in the United States, there's better use of that money to domestic needs. And so we need private sector to come in and to price in risks and to make judicious and prudent decisions around investments, and they need to be tied in to this decarbonization narrative as well.
Yeah, and with that, Rene,
we thought we lost you there for a second, Nathalie.
No, I was connecting my computer because it was almost dying. But with that, I think it's important to understand the pillars to the convention. And I have to go back to the convention to understand this whole speech, that we are listening to. It's like humanitarian aid. I mean, like I said before, the climate change convention has the principle of common but differentiated, commitments approach. So if we think of this about humanitarian aid and how taxpayer money it's being deployed because of your commitment, because you're industrialized already, like you emitted, and that's why you're the second largest emitter of the world, and that's why the whole world is suffering from your emissions causing global warming. And if people don't understand that they have a multilateral commitment from taxpayer money to actually deploy aid, when something happens, like has happened everywhere in the world because of climate change, then we don't understand it at all. So that's something that we need to internalize. I perfectly understand that.
But can I push back just a little bit? Politely. So what's happening in the US, I think, is a really interesting case. And again, we talked about this last week a little bit with regards to the sentiment. And I'm not advocating for certain political views or not. I'm just commenting on kind of the zeitgeist in terms of what has changed. And with the introduction of DOGE, whether you agree or not agree, it's essentially looking to reduce waste in the public sector. And I think it is fair to say that governments are not necessarily the most efficient organizations, right, in the world. Highly bureaucratic, highly sort of, some can say ineffective. And in this case, when it points to USAID, I think that the aid mission is certainly warranted, but maybe the execution wasn't the best in terms of some of the allocations. Media have grabbed onto it politicians have grabbed onto certain cases, and those have not translated well from a populist kind of approach. What the ultimate results that's happening, and I'm referring to an article that I read in Bloomberg earlier in the week, I think actually 2 days ago, it came out on Wednesday, but essentially that there's potential that that the USAID funds get effectively transferred to another US agency, a little known agency called the US International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC. And if that happens, DFC then becomes a pretty big and well-funded organization with a very different mandate, one that's akin to, the one that's driven in large part in terms of its name, its finance. And so certainly it'll provide development and aid, but it'll do so with a fiduciary lens. And so they'll allocate finance, but as debt primarily, with a view that they need to provide a return on investment, and then that money goes back to Treasury, as opposed to being a gift, which is what USAID was essentially doing, essentially development aid without necessarily conditionality of repayment. And I think that that's going to be a shift to this kind of business approach that the US is kind of advocating for. I don't think it's deleterious. I actually think that that's probably quite pragmatic and quite okay. It'll play well in the base, right? Political base. And we just have to adapt with regards to that lens. And it's no different from how the private sector operates, right? Private sector investors make decisions based on risk, adjustment, counterparty, political, and obviously the payback periods of these assets. And I think that we from the private sector certainly do that on a daily basis. It has to be underwritten. Projects have to be underwritten through offtakes, through other forms of revenue in order to stand up. And if they don't, unfortunately, they don't just come about because someone gave them a grant, right? And I think that that's a change. What's your thoughts?
and it's very, I mean, it's unlikely that you say that, but what I wanted to use that example at the same time for people, to understand, because we have in the same approach of information, because we want the Paris Agreement to work. We want Article 6 of the Paris Agreement to work, right? And if we want that, we have to understand what are the foundation platform of the Paris Agreement, which is the Climate Change Convention, and what it's established over there in terms of the countries that ratify the Climate Change Convention, and that it goes to...
So dive in on that. Tell us about it.
No, exactly.
So you've had a front seat view.
I think it'd be good for the audience as well, who may not understand Article 6 and Article 6.2, 6.4. A lot of the listeners may be new to understanding international climate finance and carbon markets. So that'd be great if you could kind of set the scene, given your experience at the
Give us a
UN
masterclass then.
No, I was going to talk more about the how a multilateral agreement comes into place and how it is ratified by a country, by their Congress, by their Supreme Court, to actually have that commitment at the multilateral level. And with that, what I want to say is that I perfectly understand what you just explained. I probably agree with most of what you said. There are things that actually are going to be missed in a sense that create an infrastructure. For example, in the case of my specific country, with the infrastructure created for the transition to renewable energy. But of course, we have a law of renewable energy incentives, which is what makes investment in renewables in the Dominican Republic from what it's unlocked from the UN Climate Change Convention and the Paris Agreement. But yeah, to my point, I understand what you explain about the aid in general, and that it shouldn't be deployed that way. And maybe we are going to see changes in other economies that deployed aid at this point. But that's where I see like markets saving nature, if that makes sense, because of the whole infrastructure created to actually make it a robust financial asset. And maybe Monica and I spent a lot of time together, because when she brought the clean development mechanism, and in the previous conversation, I was going to bring that up again. Like, how can we be so delayed if we went through this road before and it worked, you know? But yeah, I think I leave it there for now, and the whole Paris scheme, because I don't want to scare people out. And maybe I just make a note for you to invite somebody else to delve in that. I was brainstorming with Monica, with you, of the whole pulling out of this kind of agreement and what it means to the businesses operating and trying to bring that agreement into place. And let's give the example of aviation, right? And I'm not an expert on that, so I don't want, get too deep into that. But if a country leaves the Paris Agreement, but then there's another agreement, right? Or another institution of governments, such as ICAO, that put into place a mechanism that is called CORSIA. And one of the requirements for certain countries' airlines is to actually have a corresponding adjustment letter. And a corresponding adjustment letter is a tool of the Paris Agreement. But you're out of the Paris Agreement. So how you're going to make that tool work in your scheme when a country that is part of the Paris Agreement issue that letter? So, brainstorming and
jumping in
analyzing
here
that.
for our audience, for our listeners, could you explain exactly what a corresponding adjustment is? Right, I think a lot of people sometimes get confused that are outside the market.
Let's give it to Monica to see how.
Or anyone
Monica's
want
gonna love
to
that one.
take a jab at that?
¿Por qué me haces esto, Nathalie María?
When the middle name comes out, you're in trouble.
No sé si puedo explicar esto en inglés. No creo que pueda explicar esto en inglés.
Hazlo tú, Nathalie. You go. You do it.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'll do CORSIA. How's that? I'll explain CORSIA, but no, Nathalie, I think you explain the corresponding adjustment. It's only fair.
Okay, so basically it's to avoid, it's the tool to avoid double accounting, right? So when you have a project that is measurable, reportable, and verifiable, you put this under the framework of an agreement between two countries, right? You have a developed country and a developing country that come together first under a memorandum of understanding, then under an implementation agreement, and then under the project development and implementation itself. And when you're ready to get approval and verification that your project issues international transfer mitigation outcomes, which is better known as ITMO, and in the voluntary carbon market, it's known as a credit, right? Then you're going to receive a letter and of verification of the country that it's providing this credit to use it towards your country's NDC, showing that you're helping the planet to stay in balance. Let's say it that way. So that means that even if I remove those credits, those ITMOs from my country, you use it towards your country and the objective of your country's emissions reduction targets, we're going to keep a balance because it's measurable, verifiable, and reportable, that this credit is not being double used in any of the countries. And for example, in the case of a developing countries, you can define how much of that quota that is issued from that ITMO is going to stay in your country or going out there to actually be able to achieve your own national determined contribution or decarbonization goals. So that's in a very trying to be non-too technical, explaining a corresponding adjustment letter. So the letter
that was great.
The letter is that certificate that you are actually reducing carbon emissions in a place to actually use it in your scheme, and nobody is emitting more than what they need to do. So the letter is a letter, but it's a tool. So it's a verification tool, let's say. Rene.
Well, I'll hand them. Monica, do you want to add anything on that?
No, I think Nathalie explained it very, very clear. That was I wanted to do it.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. I think what I'll add, if I can just add some kind of color commentary, is an accounting tool essentially to prevent or avoid double counting. And so as a country accounts for and then ultimately allows for the sale of these carbon credits, they take that emission reduction. It's essentially now we're doing negative integers, a -1, and takes that out of its nationally determined contribution. And then the buyer can count it, but not the buyer and the seller. So that's the double counting, avoidance of double counting component. Now to CORSIA and I guess the intersection, I'll do it justice as well, because I had also the privilege of being kind of front row for a lot of these conversations. But essentially, and you mentioned this, Nathalie, with regards to ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, headquartered out of Montreal, which represents, as the name suggests, international aviation. And because international aviation is a borderless market, right? Like maritime, it spans the globe. They wanted a essentially a regulation to curb emissions. And it was a reaction essentially to what was being termed the potential for a patchwork quilt. If you're not familiar with a patchwork quilt, it's, you know, when the grandmother sews a quilt with different fabrics, all different together, and it kind of makes this composite. Imagine now being an airline with an obligation for compliance in one country, then another, and then another, and then another, and then another. It becomes really onerous and really just difficult to meet compliance obligations. One may be an ETS, one may be a tax, one may have a sort of fungibility of voluntary instruments, et cetera, and it becomes really difficult. So the ICAO members, which are the member states, the countries, effectively wanted a single system that was a level playing field. And they defined this approach to decarbonization with 4 pillars: technological efficiency, operational efficiency, sustainable aviation fuels, and then a market-based mechanism. CORSIA represents this market-based mechanism component and effectively defines a baseline and then a carbon neutral growth commitment. So emissions that exceed the baseline need to be either compensated with sustainable aviation fuels that diminish or decrease those emissions, or through the purchase of eligible emission units, or EEUs. And it is a phase implementation approach. We've just completed the pilot phase, and now we're into phase 1, and then we go into the compliance phase. And essentially, phase 1 is 2024, 25, and 26, and then the compliance phase starts from 27 all the way through to 35. And it aligns with this trajectory of achieving net zero for the industry. So what does it mean in practice? It means that governments effectively now have opted into this system, and they regulate their airlines. And now, as all other countries that opt into this system, international airspaces and international air travel is regulated from an emissions perspective. We had the pilot phase, but because of the pandemic, airlines were effectively grounded, and we didn't see an excess or exceeding or excess of the emissions above the baseline. We've adjusted the baseline, and now 25, 26, et cetera, is expected to exceed that threshold and therefore create demand from airlines. So now to Nathalie's question, how does a country like the United States that has now opted out of the Paris Agreement ultimately intersect with CORSIA, which is an international agreement? And I don't think, and I want to relay people's concerns, I don't think that the United States can exit ICAO, right? Because they might not be voluntarily into phase 1, but the compliance phase is called the compliance phase for a reason. And they can't really exit ICAO because ICAO and it's the Chicago Convention, I believe, is what regulates international airspace, and it would be hugely detrimental to the United States economy, as we've seen during the pandemic, to not allow international flights, right? Like if a United Airlines or a Delta Airlines flight was trying to fly to Frankfurt or to Madrid, and they couldn't do that because of some political decision, that's not going to happen, quite frankly. But the question is that Nathalie said and posed is, well, in this language around the eligible emission units, there are carve-outs for, and I'm reading it here, units that have been authorized by the host country for use in CORSIA by way of an attestation to the avoidance of double claiming. So the host country needs to provide that letter of authorization for the purposes of selling those credits into the international market that is CORSIA. The host country will effectively export those credits, but what's lacking on the other side is the country to which that airline belongs to make that corresponding adjustment on their side of the ledger. But at least the host country is exporting them, so there's no double counting. In this case, the airlines are purchasing those credits and effectively they're taking out of circulation ITMOs. So I think that's how I see it. Happy to open it up to others. And I would love to honestly involve and include other more qualified people to talk about this topic in future episodes. But Monica, if you want to opine on that.
Yeah, I think Rene and I have like a very similar way of seeing it, because actually I was discussing this with Nathalie yesterday, and I told her that, but the corresponding adjustment is for CORSIA. That was what my understanding. Maybe I'm wrong, and that's why we need someone expert. But it's to use it for the CORSIA agreement, in this case, not for the United States. So I don't know if the Delta, who received the corresponding adjustment, then have to go through the country, and then the country is the one who presented to CORSIA. You know, I don't know what is the process in that
Let's exclude the US. Let's exclude the US, but I'll tell you the process. So because I've been advising airlines for a very long time, and I was also privy when I was actually reflecting on this, right? Because Nathalie, Monica, you said, okay, you came in 2019 and you've been waiting for ages for the Paris Agreement to kind of get implemented. I was in Paris when the Paris Agreement was adopted, and I was in Montreal when CORSIA was adopted. I just happened to be at both of these incredible turning points in our market, quite deliberately. It wasn't just accidental. I was actually at ICAO's offices when the market-based mechanism was adopted. But the process is as you just intimated, Monica, which is country A. Let's take Spain, because you guys are in Spain, right? So the Iberia and other airlines that report or that are domiciled in that country report to their regulator, right? So in the US, it's the FAA and it's CAA in different countries and whatever the name is in each individual country. So country A puts a mandate to their airlines to submit their reporting obligations, which came into effect in 2019, and also to demonstrate that they are in compliance with their regulation and in accordance to the ICAO rule set. They collect all of that information saying, okay, total emissions for our sector, for our airlines, for international aviation is X, and it's 5, 6, 10, however many airlines are flying internationally. They collect that data, then they scrub the airline code, they put that in a file, and then they send that to ICAO. ICAO then checks, okay, country A, country B, country C is in compliance, and they go down the list and they'll say, one country, whoa, why are you non-compliant? And that's the question around penalties, and it hasn't yet been defined. Mm-hmm. But once that is defined, then there's some multilateral sort of system around, hey, you're not complying with this accord, and effectively, there'll be ramifications. That hasn't yet been defined, and it's up to the individual countries right now to implement. And that's how I understand it. But I'll leave this as an opportunity for Simon Paulson-Jones or someone who's an expert, Michael Schneider from IATA, folks from ICAO who I know, to come in on a future episode to correct me.
Yes, please. Yes, please, because I want to know. I want to know what once the airline that receives the corresponding adjustment and completes their process to the mechanism, because a mechanism is not a country, how that is going to be held accountable for the country that is member of ICAO and it's member of the Paris Agreement, that it's what needs to actually rely on the corresponding adjustment letter, because it's corresponding from one country to the other. So yeah, I really want to learn that. Yeah, and with that, I think we've been here for 1.5 hours.
We have.
And we can keep
going.
Yeah.
We can. The problem in this good, because we've got both Nathalie and myself here, and we're just taking all the oxygen. Eddie, you got to jump in.
Yeah. Well, I've just been listening to this masterclass, and I think we could dive into it deeper for hours and hours. But yeah, obviously conscious of everyone's time, so I'd love to wrap up with some big picture type of reflection questions. I'd love to go around the horn and get everyone's answer, just short, brief, concise.
Nat and
Try to
Rene
make it
short.
brief. Yeah, especially you, Renee. No, I'm just kidding. But okay, so I got two questions, and this one might sound a little funny, but I think the listeners would appreciate it. If you had a magic wand and could implement one climate policy or breakthrough technology today, what would it be and why?
Wow.
So whoever, yeah, it's a tough question, but
Okay.
would love to hear your guys' thoughts and answers.
So repeat the question again,
Or-
Eddie, for the slow
The
people
question-
here on the panel.
So if you had a magic wand and could implement one climate policy or breakthrough technology today, what would it be and why?
Okay,
Who
I'll
wants to
go
go
first
first?
to help.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would like to wonder by the time 14 years of work of dreaming, reaching decisions upon a consensus basis, which Rene already explained how difficult it is to actually have 198 countries to come to agreements when they need to, extrapolate all their legal framework to actually defend their countries at the international level. So if I think of consensus and the result of consensus, I will really like to make COP28 decisions and the global stock take decisions on triple renewable energy in the world. I want to downscale it beyond the magic wand because it's like make something work in such a difficult environment. So I think the magic wand was actually reaching UAE consensus. So reaching the global stock take for triple investment in renewable energy and abatement of methane and other gases. So let's say my magic wand, it's that decision. And what I'll do with the magic wand, it's to actually working and seeing the renewable energy market even as a commodity thriving. I did my thesis when I was doing my Master of Science in the implementation of renewable energy technologies and analyzing the climate quota of the United Kingdom law and how it helps a vulnerable community. And by this, I talk about elderly people in the UK, because when you see a big country, you never imagine of the people actually suffering in a big country, like poor people that are actually struggling. And we analyze how they change their behavior in the household, and how they were actually making good use of energy, renewable energy, and actually reducing their carbon emissions. So yeah, I like to see that. And also that was my first session as Vice Chair of Science and Technology of the UN Climate Change. So I have a big fund for the UAE consensus.
Amazing. Well said. Well said. Okay, Monica, what do you think here?
Yeah, I think in my case, I would like to end the debate, and I'm thinking about more in the market perspective of the avoiding and removals. I think we need to create maybe, I don't know, a system where both are part of this, because while we are efficiently cutting or removing CO2 from the atmosphere, we also need to prevent this happen in the future and every day. So avoiding is, for me, just crucial as removal. Stopping emission before that happening can drastically slow climate change. And we cannot keep that discussions, or maybe we need to improve the methodology. Maybe we need to improve the way we are seeing it right now. But I think we need to stop that debate and start creating a system where both of them are in the market and compatibles. How do you say compatibles?
Compatible, yeah.
Compatibles as a solution for the climate crisis.
Yeah.
Such a good,
Yeah,
that's such a
definitely,
good
I think.
answer. damn it.
Eddie,
Rene, were you gonna
Eddie,
say something similar?
Eddie, you need to say yours as well. Well,
I
Rene,
will. I will. I'll
Hold on
go
a minute.
after
Doesn't Eddie
Rene.
get the last word? He's the
no,
host.
you
Yeah.
too, both of you,
I don't
but
want the last word.
you're still
But
thinking.
okay, so I'm still thinking. Exactly. Thank you for throwing me under the bus there, Nat Legend. No, I'll go with Nat, with Monica. I think, you know, there's if I'm waving the magic wand, I'd like to just have consensus. Back to something that Nathalie said earlier. What is the mission? Make sure that everybody's on board with the mission, right? I think we hit a certain moment in the zeitgeist in 2020 when the financial sector was you know, and investors in particular were on board with this mission, that governments were on board with the mission, that industry was on board with the mission, and that the local, it's just like the global populace and the just everyone, the market, everybody was in consensus. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is kind of pulling away from that center. So my magic wand would be to say, hey, let's all focus on the mission at large and come back to that center. I know that's it's kind of wishful thinking, but that's kind of, you asked for a magic wand, right?
Yeah, it's a magic wand. And yeah, I think
What about you, Eddie?
taking a more technological perspective in regards to energy, you know, I don't want to say about the debates with climate or, you know, this policy or that policy. I think if I had a magic wand, I would simply wave it, and nuclear energy would be widespread adopted in the US or around the world, economically viable from nuclear fusion reactors. We'd have 24/7 clean, reliable power. I think that would decarbonize the energy sector very, very, very quickly, and in industry as well. So I think if I had a nuclear wand, I would love for nuclear energy to be widespread adopted and implemented across the world. I think that would save us a lot of emissions in the future.
When
Right.
people hear nuclear, get scared. I think they
Yeah.
don't understand a lot of things about that.
Yeah, they do. Because they confuse nuclear power with nuclear weapons and nuclear war, right? It's I think we have some NGOs to blame for that in the 70s and 80s, but I'm not going to get into that
I think you
topic.
pontificated on that one last time. But yeah, on that
Yeah,
note, I
'cause-
think I just want to thank you both for joining us, Nathalie and Monica. It was so much fun. We got to do this again in person in Madrid or in Miami. Because
Or in
Nat, you move, or in Singapore, yes,
Yeah.
or in Singapore. Come over
Singapore,
anytime.
Miami.
Are
I think
you guys
Miami would
going
be
to
a little bit more
Lisbon for
fun.
the IETA European Climate Summit?
I don't know. Still.
I mean,
Monica, I'll
neither.
see you there.
I don't know.
Come
I
on, it's
don't
gonna be
know.
so
Well,
much fun.
I will try. I will try.
It's
Yeah.
Lisbon. It's such a great city.
Yeah.
It's an easy sell.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going.
I have to go, guys, but
All
Yes.
right. Thank you.
thank
Thank you so
Ciao,
much
ciao.
Love
for
you
being
guys.
here.
you.
It was a
Appreciate
wonderful
it.
discussion. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
No, thank
right.
you.
Yeah.
Bye. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that being said, it's just
Done.
us, Renee.
That's it, man. Wrap it up.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of This Week in Carbon. You know, we'd like to thank our guests who just left
Who just
for
bailed.
sharing their insights and expertise. And yeah, if you enjoyed this discussion, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe on YouTube, and tune into next week as we continue breaking down the biggest stories and topics in carbon markets and climate finance.
Well
You know?
said. Well done.
Like,
Well,
follow, subscribe, boom.
boom. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.